All right then. Well, I'm going to take my hat off.
Oh, serious. Serious, yeah.
Welcome to teaching kids to code. No, welcome. We're going to talk about teaching kids to code today, as you probably figured out by now. I think you all know who that I am, although I got a chance to plug my stuff here. In addition to working at Lullabot, I also host a podcast about free software called Hacking Culture, where I do interviews with free software advocates. This month's issue is actually one of my first Drupal-related ones, and it was an interview with Holly Ross from the Drupal Association, so there is some Drupal. And I help organize this camp a little bit. So yeah, that's me. And I learned how to start coding when I was young as well. All right, so it used to be, back when we wanted to teach our kids skills, we might teach them farming, maybe we'd teach them how to forge a sword, the ABCs, ride a bike, things like that. But nowadays, a lot of people want to teach their kids how to code. And you still hearing us?
No, it's just
Nope.
No, it's just Carrie wondering.
Oh, it's Carrie. Hi, Carrie. Everybody downstairs. Whoever else is listening. Hello.
You're doing awesome.
Thank you. Yes, so this is going great. So we have, when I've talked to people like at conferences like this, it seems like lots of people are very interested and they want their kids to code. Even when you go to a school or something like that, parents are realizing that coding, whatever they think that means, is a useful skill. So you might think that if I'm talking about coding at a Drupal camp, that I might be talking about somebody like Dmitry Gaskin. And Dmitry taught himself how to code when he was 8. He built his elementary school website when he was 10. He built it with Drupal. He started getting very involved with Drupal development, and one day showed up at a meetup, and they thought Dmitry 01 was some Russian guy, but it turned out to be a kid. And by the time he was 16, he was giving keynotes at a Drupal camp in Australia. And just this year, he's on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. So depending on your measure of success, you could say Dmitry's done all right for himself. But I'm not talking about specifically someone like Dmitry, although I've met him, he's awesome, and I am more interested in this idea of teaching all kids coding. So I reject these labels of ninja and rock star and genius, and we heard Angie Byron talk about this morning, that we don't want to make this something that is only for a select few. So I think that talent is overrated. And there's actually a lot of research to support this, that kids, when they learn new things, this goes for adults as well, that some people do fairly well when they start off, but generally after, it's usually about 200 hours of practice or so, the differences in those that picked up early and those that started off and had more difficulty, they start to get measured out. They start to get, it starts to become very difficult to determine who started that was really easy and who was not, and then it just becomes more of something that people need to learn. And this goes for chess, this goes for learning how to play the violin, and I think this goes for coding as well. So I decided I wanted to teach my kids coding. So what did I do? So a few years ago I sat down with my daughter, and of course we had to decide, should we use Vim or Emacs? Because we needed a text editor, right? That's what coding is to me. And I am a Drupal developer, so I'm sort of, I guess, excusing myself because that's how it was for me to teach code. That's what coding meant to me, was sitting down with the text editor, writing text, pulling out the terminal and compiling it. So we did that kind of stuff. And it was fun. She had fun with it, and I, had the skills that were required to teach her how to do that. And we did little games, and we did like choose your own adventures, and we followed some things we found on the web. And that is one way to teach kids to code. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that, and I think it's a great way for parents or guardians or whoever that want to sit down with their a kid, niece, nephew, whatever, and teach about coding. And, you could say, well, maybe we don't actually want to teach them like a language, like starting with SQL statements or something like that. That might not be all that interesting, but we have a GUI for that, right? So we have this much easier thing to use. But this, too, really is not quite, an appropriate thing, I would say, for a lot of younger kids. Maybe older kids, you could teach them views. So one way that you can teach kids to code is by following along with books. And this is a way that you can take what other people have learned. They've synthesized it. I won't try to say that word anymore. And they have good examples in lots of books. This particular book has useful examples. And you can follow along and you can teach your kid coding, or a kid coding, or a group of kids coding. So the thing with books, though, is there isn't really a community of that gets built up around a book. Maybe the publisher wants to try and do this kind of thing, but for the most part, the book is something that you do maybe one-on-one or maybe with a small group of people using it. There isn't a lot of way to share your successes if you do something cool. Hey, yes, it's cool when I see it, but sometimes there's other ways to motivate kids, and one of them is certainly sharing what they've done with their friends. Scheduling can be an issue as well, because if you are going to sit down and teach someone how to code, or you're going to read a book, or you're just going to give the book to a kid, then you have to figure out a time to do it. So sometimes I help my kids learn how to code, but sometimes I help them with their cello lessons, or their math lessons, or their Spanish homework, or whatever it is. And all of these things are competing. And then also there's this barrier, I think, that is you have to have a good purpose. Like today, Sunday, the 27th, I should be teaching my kids how to code today. Well, I can't do it. I have a Drupal conference. So there are all kinds of reasons that get in your way. So books have lots of good information, and I'm not putting them down, but there are limitations. So other people have other good advice. So you can go out on the internet and find lots of great advice. Just last week, there was an article on opensource.com by someone who'd written 4 books about teaching kids to program. He's got lots of good practical advice. These might be the kinds of things that you would have expected me to talk more about, but certainly, Scratch for younger kids, yes. Python for older kids. Keep your hands off the keyboard, let them type. All of these things are good suggestions. And all of these slides I'll have up right after this talk in the description on the page. So, in Minnesota we have a number of groups. Code Savvy is one sort of umbrella organization. CoderDojo in the Twin Cities is another one. And there's lots of groups that are out there that have a mission to try and teach kids to code locally. There's also groups, more broadly speaking, there's the Black Girls Code. There's other groups geared towards women. Here in Minnesota, we have Technovation Minnesota. And they are, as their tagline says, enabling young women to transfer the world one mobile app at a time. So there are groups on the web, there's advice on the web, there's a ton of websites that have really good information, and this is just a small list of some of the more well-known ones. And by the way, like Code Academy, Code.org, these are filled with good resources. teaching kids with Code Academy is very awesome because it gets you beyond having to do the sort of hello world program kind of stuff. They have all kinds of neat in-browser tools. These are things that make that process of teaching kids to code much easier. And those are all links, again, in the slides. So, what am I here to talk about then? Well, I am here in part to tell the story about Minnetonka Public Schools and what they've been doing with coding. So, Minnetonka, you say, what is that? Well, for those of you maybe not from this area or who live in this area but don't know about us out in the suburbs, Minnetonka is the blocks on the left there, and we're approximately where the N or so is in that Minneapolis, St. Paul's over there on the right. So you get a sense of where we're talking about geographically here. That's Lake Minnetonka on the left, that big blobby thing. And I also want to mention that I am a graduate of Minnetonka Public School System, so I've got some pride, so I'm biased. So there you have it. Just wanted to throw that out there as well. And I also feel the need to mention that Minnetonka schools they're fairly well ranked, depending on how you look at, what rankings you want to look at. It's usually one of the top schools in the state. So they have resources, they have money. It's a fairly well-to-do community, and I don't think that this is necessarily a prerequisite for kids or a school district being able to do this, but I do want to mention it sort of as a disclaimer. Because generally speaking, when it comes to teaching kids how to code, schools don't usually have the staff to do it. They don't often have top-notch programmers that are on staff that can be devoted to teaching coding classes. That's just not how our culture tends to work nowadays. There are certainly exceptions to this. But typically, though, if they do have someone that knows about coding, it'll be someone like a math teacher. And if that math teacher is teaching a class, it's probably going to be just in the high school. It's probably not going to be younger kids, middle school kids, junior high, maybe junior high. And then typically, if there's coding classes, it's an elective. So this is kind of the typical scenario that probably most of you are familiar with. But Minnetonka had an idea. In one of their idea fairs, they have these each year where they come up with a lot of ideas, and they say, in one year they said, well, what if we taught computer programming to all of our students K through 12? What would that look like? And it turns out this was a pretty popular idea. They had a focus group with students. They had multiple focus groups with parents. I was one of the parents that got an email one day that said, hey, we're thinking about doing coding. Do you want to come by and talk about it? How many of you in the room do you think, if you had kids, would stop by at a meeting like that? Yeah, so this was the thing where I saw that and I thought, sweet, coding, cool. So we came down, and what they did is, I think it's kind of remarkable. They actually just listened. They said, well, what do you think this should be? What are your ideas? And they said, well, we have some ideas about this, but we want to hear, what do you think? Why do you want your kids to learn how to code? What kind of skills do you want them to learn? Do you think it should be part of the curriculum? Do you think we should be taking away from something else to add coding? So the overwhelming majority of the people that attended and the people that offered advice back was, let's do this. So they said, let's form a committee, because that's what schools do. So they started the Tonka Code Design Committee, and I was one of the people on it, but it was a group that was a diverse group of people. Parents, teachers, principals, people from the community that were business people that thought this was a good idea, the media specialists, and I learned a lot from this process. And one of the things I learned was that I think a lot differently about teaching kids to code than a teacher does. So I already shared with you that I started with a text editor and a terminal, but that is not how these other people I was talking to thought about coding. But what we ended up being able to do was take a lot of ideas and put forth a plan. So one of the things was we decided that this should be multidisciplinary, that this shouldn't just be like one special class that's done like math class or something like this, that really coding is like a language, and we should teach it kind of like we would a language and have it integrated into different disciplines. So say we thought, let's say in kindergarten, you have one unit where you do something that's like coding. Or in first grade, you have a unit in music class, or maybe it's in your reading class. So we thought of all the different kinds of ways that you might be able to integrate coding into the curriculum to be able to not totally disrupt what the students were already learning, but to augment it, to give them new skills, maybe teaching the same thing in a different way, or somehow integrating it into multiple disciplines. We also thought that it was important that it not just be something that's curricular, which is during a class in the school, but also that there were additional opportunities. If the kids liked it and they wanted to have maybe a lunchtime coding club, we should encourage that. If they were really into it, maybe they wanted to join the coding club after school and do it as an after-school activity. So we wanted to encourage all kinds of these activities. We thought that would be key to actually letting students be able to take some skills and then develop them year after year. It wasn't something that they would do all year, each day or something like that. And then we thought as the students got older that they should have the opportunity to specialize in something, that somehow we would want to offer them the ability to do game development. Maybe other students would be more interested in something they thought or was perceived to be more business friendly, and they could learn Java. Maybe other students were more interested in the web, and they might want to do Python. So this is still a work in process for the school district. This is still something that we're trying to figure out, but these are some of the big ideas that we came up with. And I think in a lot of ways I think a lot of these could serve as a template for other schools that are considering this. If you don't even want to mimic copy like what Minnetonka is doing, these are at least something to get the conversation going about here's the kinds of things that you need to consider. And for me, it was important to talk a lot about free software. I thought both from a practical standpoint as well as a philosophical standpoint that we should encourage the kids to be able to use free software, and that we should be able to incorporate that into the school so there wasn't additional licensing fees and they didn't have to they didn't have to worry about getting contracts with companies or that type of thing per se. But that if they had the opportunity to teach a kind of software that they could continue to use with the version they wanted and that kind of thing, just like we do with Drupal. And one of the key points of this was that we were going to start young. We were going to start with the kindergartners. We were going to start with the elementary students, and we were going to work our way up. Because we thought, might as well start them, and then we have a reason to keep on going with the other grades so that we have something to keep the kids going in middle school and then in high school. So we became essentially the first state in Minnesota to offer elementary computer programming, or at least that was the plan. But before we even started adding this to the curriculum, we decided to experiment. So in some of the schools, they thought in 2013, they said, let's do this hour of code thing. So how many of you are familiar with the hour of code? Okay. The hour of code is, the idea is that we should give all students the ability to learn about code, kind of like what I'm talking about, and their goal was to just say, let's start with 1 hour at a school. And they have fancy videos with people like Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates trying to promote coding, talking about jobs in coding. And they have a lot of tools on code.org that talk about how you can do this in your school. So this is a great first step, starting small, to say, maybe we don't know what we're going to get into, but let's start with 1 hour. And then in the Minnetonka School District, they made it optional for whatever teachers wanted to come by and do this. Let's do that. And what kind of things do we do? Well, we didn't use Vim. So, for example, I signed up to help with the Hour of Code at my local school, and so I helped with kindergartners, third graders, fifth graders, and I thought, what the heck are we going to do, with the kindergartners? And this is what we did. A lot of them learned CargoBot, and this is an iPad app, which is not free software, but it teaches the kids who are kindergartners in a platform that most kindergartners use, believe it or not, that all the kids these days have iPads. It teaches them to do something like, I want to move these 4 blocks from one side to the other side. So what do you have to do? The handle has to go down, it has to go up, it has to go right, then it has to go down again and let go, but it has to do that 4 times, so let's loop it. So kids are learning for loops by playing with blocks, which is probably a better way to learn than in a text editor. Who'd have thought? The older kids learned on something called Scratch. And Scratch is some fantastic software available at scratch.mit.edu that's totally free and open source. And it used to be that you had to download Scratch, but now Scratch is available in the browser, and you can have just as many of the functionality, and you can even save your work. It has tutorials built right into the software, so if someone's new to Scratch, they can just follow along in the tutorial. It's actually a great way to teach kids that are, say, 3rd grade to 9th grade, how the concepts of programming. Because it's built with blocks, because it has dancing dinosaurs or whatever you want it to be, and they can use any images. You can create a whole lot of things using Scratch, and it'll help you avoid things like syntax errors because certain blocks don't go with other blocks. So it tries to help out the kids and make it so something works. But it also gives them the opportunity to view the code if they want to. So this is a great thing to do teaching kids that are slightly older, and I had mentioned this before. That's Scratch. Then we thought, well, let's start a coding club for 4th and 5th graders, like we had talked about. So at the school where I was volunteering with another teacher, we set out an email, and it filled up within 40 minutes. We had 25 computers. Okay, so what else could we do? Could we make this bigger? And then we said, well, let's double the class size. Let's try we'll try having kids doing iPads. We'll have 2 groups. We'll have 50 kids. And then we still had a waiting list. So it was yet another indication that the kids and I guess in this case, the parents were interested in coding. This is actually, this is one of the kids learning Scratch in that coding club in 2014. The middle school had a number of programs as well. They had an Arduino club, they had a Raspberry Pi club, and most of the time it was parents volunteering. And I have found that it seems like when the parents come to the schools and the administrators, and they're already in that mindset that we're going to be doing something, they were willing to say, heck, go ahead. Good Minnesotans would say, heck yeah, you come in and teach a class. So, you have to deal with things like background checks and volunteering and finding classroom space and figuring out the hardware. So, we started to realize some of the challenges. And with the Raspberry Pi Club, they had to find some Raspberry Pis and monitors and things like that. And for those of you that don't know, that's just a small computer that's like the size of a little board. It's like this big. It costs $35, but it has things like Scratch pre-installed and Python pre-installed. So it's also very geared towards teaching kids. In the high school, these 2 guys started a Tonka CoderDojo chapter. It was the first high school-based CoderDojo in the country. And I've been volunteering at that. That's a once-a-month kind of thing. It's the 3rd Saturday of the month. And we have volunteers that are mentors like me that come in, and we teach different types of activities to high school students. And we open it up not just to Minnetonka high school students, but also to students that want to learn how to code that are from nearby communities. There's a CoderDojo in the Twin Cities, as I mentioned, and that has a waiting list every month, so they were happy to have another group. Our group has a waiting list every month. one of our biggest problems is that we want people to sign up as mentors, and then based on how many mentors we get, we can, add students. And parents would play dumb and sign their kids up as mentors, and then we'd show up and 6 people we thought were supposed to be mentors were actually students, and then we had to, scramble. So every time that I've been involved in one of these activities, there's lots of demand for it. And people do interesting things to be able to dump their kids off on a Saturday afternoon. But eventually we had to start, right? So this year was the year where we decided we're going to start teaching 5,000 elementary students to code. And there's 6 elementary schools in the Minnetonka School District, and as their little, I guess this is like a marketing piece here on the website said that we're going to start this and we're going to teach K through 5 computer coding in the curriculum. And who's going to teach it? The teachers. So we had to train 350 elementary school teachers how to teach coding. So one of the great things about the Minnetonka district is the guy who was basically running a lot of this, his name is Eric Schneider, was the superintendent for instruction. He seems to have a very, very good grasp of how things work in communities like ours. And he realizes that he's way out of his comfort zone because he doesn't know anything about programming. And he talked about himself teaching elementary students. Like he talked about how he taught all of the kindergarten teachers personally about this and how it pushed a lot of them way out of their comfort zone. But he understands that the world is changing and that the teachers have to change their mindset when it comes to coding. That most of the time, teachers come to the classroom knowing that they are the experts on the subject. They know spelling, they know math, they know what's going on, they have training in this, they know how to deal with the kids. Suddenly they're asking them, all right, we're going to teach you something new, you're going to have to figure it out, it's going to be kind of complicated, you're thinking it's probably something for people that are only geniuses and ninjas, and they might actually know more about it than you do. Good luck. But they didn't say good luck like we're not going to help you. Good luck, and we're going to help you. We're going to offer assistance, and those of you who want more assistance, we're going to help you. And a lot of the teachers really embraced this, and some of the other teachers were understandably scared, but came along and got trained anyway. And as we introduced this to the curriculum, we continued to do after-school coding club. I taught a Finch robot class with another retired programmer just earlier this year, and the Finch robot was a lot of fun because we added another grade for our coding club. Now we had 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. The 5th graders got to use the Finch robots. The Finch robot is a cool little thing that has sensors, light sensors, and it has you can control the wheels. You can make it blink. You can program this thing in one of 30 different languages, and we use something called Snap, and it creates this what they call like a bird brain library, so they can use the Scratch interface because Scratch is open source. They could fork it, add a library that allowed the students to interact with the Finch, and having learned Scratch coding club last year, a familiar environment, they could now program these robots, and they could do things like this one is finding its own way through that maze that we set up randomly. And on the last day of class, the media specialists were smart enough to say, let's have the older kids demonstrate what they did with the Finch robots that we bought, so that next year the younger kids are going to want to do this themselves. And it was brilliant. I mean, that's not the kind of thing that I would have thought of, but this is just probably kind of natural for a lot of teachers. So we did all kinds of fun things. With the Finch robot, we did things like attach a marker to it and let them draw circles over and over and over, and trying to come up with ideas where we could do things like that, because the kids soon learned that if they wanted to draw 300 circles, that it was very useful to know how to do loops, and it was very useful to learn how to do variables. That made that process much easier than maybe holding down a button or whatever else they wanted to do, and we put big sheets of paper on the ground. The other good thing about the Finch robots is they're $99, and they have lots of curriculum that's already out there. Lots of people are already doing this. We just took cool things that other schools were doing, and we played with that. So we continued to experiment. As a result of all this work, a lot of the local news stations have been very interested in this. I've been interviewed a couple of times, the Sun Sailor, the Star Tribune. There's lots of YouTube videos out there of newscasts from all the local ABC, NBC affiliates with more information about what's going on. So people seem kind of excited by what we're doing. And to give you a little bit more of a sense of what this is all about, Minnetonka has made a number of videos that they put out that explain more what the program is. This is one that's less than 3 minutes long, that I just wanted to play for you to give a sense of how this is working. And rather than look at me, see some of the faces on some of these kids and teachers. Eric is also in this video, who's helped running this whole program. And they have at least a half a dozen little videos like this with the many different aspects to this initiative.
Instead of telling him walk, 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 I could just repeat that command.
I think it's innovative, and that's what's so appealing about this too, that we're branching out into a whole new area that we hadn't done before.
This idea to teach computer programming as a core curriculum really started through an innovation process that we run every year.
So do you notice a pattern?
More and more in today's world, we look to software to help us solve problems.
It takes some practice to learn how to code stuff.
In lesson 1, you don't really want to write the same 2 code blocks 11 times over and over. It starts very easy with having programming the Cody, which is the character, to walk and make a step.
You have to use jump, walk. If it doesn't work, you can try again.
The first time I introduced it, they immediately went home. Many of them went home and got on in the evening and did additional work with coding.
You can make them almost do anything, so it's fun to see what you can do. We're supposed to make like a guy giggle forever, or something like that.
4th grade, it's totally with the software.
It's very fun. You have these cool blocks you can use to program your little dog.
In kindergarten, they're using robots, B-bots, and then they progressively get more complex. And so we're just using the software. And then with that, some of my instruction or smart slides or group discussion.
I like that you can make whatever you want and make stories.
Some of the kids are moving a little bit more quickly than others if they had that experience, which means they can do extension projects and they can do, based on what they know how to do, then they can go even farther.
I'm past my lesson right now. I'm going to the next lesson.
Have you done stuff like this before?
I haven't used Tinker, but I've used other websites.
Well, we've had a lot of positive comments and support from our parent community, and I think they understand that this has a very direct connection to the future workplace.
In the future, I would like to make some animal games, to help animals. A fun app that would get people's attention, and that would make people buy it.
This is the way to help them once they get to adult age to more seamlessly integrate and learn, regular programs like JavaScript, and that will make that more seamless and more intuitive for them.
So that gives you a little sense of what we're talking about. So this is a Drupal camp, and when I teach these classes, or when I get involved or volunteer or help out wherever I can, I come in and talk about what it's like to be a programmer, what it's like to be a coder. And yes, I talk about Drupal. So, over the last couple of years, the students have come to know what I do. I show them some of the websites we're doing, not all of the websites that we're doing. We do reality TV. No. And other things, which are good. I love our clients. I got myself in a hole there. I talk about what I'm doing. I talk about Drupal. And I tell them, you know, I use this software. You can go, you can download it, you can play with it. Here are some of the cool things that are done with it. And so we don't teach that per se, but we talk about the concepts. We talk about the software. And I would also want to push this a little bit further and say, you know, what does it mean when we're talking about code? What does it mean when we're talking about Drupal? And another group here in the Twin Cities, in the St. Paul, is called the Asian Penguins. And the kids that you're looking at here are all 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. They're middle school students. And this is a Linux user group. You can see Ubuntu in the background there. Now, what these students do is they started out just hanging out with one of their teachers, and then they started learning more about hardware, and they learned how to install software. They learned how to install Ubuntu. So they got some computers donated to their class, and then these students learned how to do the updates, and they learned how to figure out, you know, well, this computer's broken. How are we going to change that and work together? And it went beyond that. They ended up getting 30 laptops that they put Linux on, that they used in their schools, and then these middle schoolers became the tech support for these laptops. So, in addition to that, as if, you know, that wasn't enough work for the group, they decided they wanted to share what they had learned. So they do this by going out into the community and bringing computers into homes in their community where kids don't have computers. So they have a criteria where if there's a student that goes to their school, it's the Community School of Excellence in St. Paul. If the student goes there and they qualify for free or reduced lunch and they don't have a computer in the home, then they qualify. And if they do, then those kids, there's a team of like 4 or 5 come out, and they each have distinct roles where they bring the computer in, they set it up, they teach the family how to use it. One of the students, usually their job is a translator, because this Asian Penguins, I should have mentioned, is the school is all Asian students. Mostly it's like 90% Hmong. And they teach the students about, or they teach the families about how to use the computer, and then they even offer support if the kids come back and the computer doesn't work. So this past school year, they delivered 12 computers to different families, all through, and then they had 7 different fundraising events to be able to pay for the hardware. And this is doing things like, you know, selling cookies at events. So the skills that they're learning here, as it relates, and I should say this Asian Penguins, this is going to be the topic of my next podcast. I interviewed the guy who started this to talk about the program. But they are learning these skills. They're learning about how to learn. They're learning about how to troubleshoot. They're learning about teaching each other how to use software. And they're being encouraged to share what they learned. Now imagine you come to a Drupal user group for the first time and you are used to that. Kids that are used to just downloading an iPad app and paying for it and thinking of that as software have a very different worldview than these students would, in my estimation. So I kind of feel like that these are similar skills that will help push them towards learning to be successful in a community like ours. And I mean, what is our community? I wrote about this at length recently, but in our community, Drupal means a lot of things to a lot of different people. It's very personal for some people. It is something that they do for work for other people. It's something that people do, you know, like as Angie and Todd both talked about in the keynotes, it's something that they do during the day and at night and on weekends, maybe doing it too much. And Drupal is a very personal thing for a lot of people. And it's also a lot of code, right? It's a lot of these different languages. So if we want to say, well, let's teach kids to Drupal, or let's teach kids to code, I mean, does that mean that we're teaching them PHP and Twig and JavaScript and Doctrine and Guzzle and Zend? I mean, the whole idea of Drupal changes a lot. Angie also made that point, that like some of these things like Guzzle and Doctrine were not part of Drupal now, and now they are. So Drupal continues to change. So I view Drupal as an activity, as something that we do together. It's a community process that we learn how to code, we learn the concepts of coding, and then we continue to apply those. We continue to ask questions. We continue to go to the IRC rooms. We continue to go to the issue queues, help each other out, and do the same kinds of things that we're teaching these kids. So even though I feel like I'm not specifically teaching my kids coding, I feel like I am giving them the skills so they can be successful in a community like ours or other free software communities. But really, because of Drupal's culture, I feel like we are, in a way, especially preparing them in a way that's much more exciting for them to be part of our community by learning some of those fundamental values. Much more fun than trying to start a kid with a text editor or learning views. But my daughter, who's 10 years old now, has recently decided she wanted to start a blog. And she's a smart kid, and she doesn't do a lot with the configuration of the site, but suddenly words like menu items or content types are in her vocabulary. She's learned about taxonomy terms. She recently decided that she wanted to have a tab there that wasn't about dogs or fish or hamsters, but was more a general blog tab. So we had to add another tab, and she's learning some of the basics about Drupal because she was interested in having an own blog, and she thought that was cool. So I feel like I am having success there, introducing her to the community without pushing it on her. So I feel like a lot of these things that I have suggested could be used as a template for any other schools that are interested in teaching kids how to code. That what Minnetonka has done is not something that Minnetonka wants to be the only school doing. They're very open to talking to other schools, to talking to other people that are interested in getting involved, to sharing what they've learned, to sharing or to hearing about what others have learned. So I've put together a list here of resources specifically about Minnetonka, and just today I found out about this group on the this Little Hackers education group that's part of our Drupal community, and I'd encourage you to go check that out if you're interested in the subject, to follow along and see what we're doing, because really my goal is mainly to share some of the things that I've learned, to find out what others are learning, and to get more people involved so that lots and lots of kids can have these opportunities. The slides are at that URL at the bottom here. I did a podcast with Eric Schneider for Drupalize Me a few months ago about coding in schools. If you want to hear even more about this subject, more from what Eric has to say, there's more in that podcast. So there's lots of information. The Tonka Codes website has lots of links to other information as well. And I hope that this has given you maybe a different perspective on what it means to teach kids to code and be part of our Drupal community. So thank you for listening. And now there's about 10 minutes for questions if anyone still has questions.
What advice would you give for parents that have to maybe navigate more political opposition, or people that are not as accepting of outside the criteria and materials and stuff like that?
I think that, number one, I would say go to them with an idea to say, I think we should try Hour of Code and start small. That'd be one thing. But I would also say encourage them to the next time they do a survey or something like that, to have them ask the people in the community what they find to be important. if the community and the parents and the students really don't want to do it, I don't know how you could or why you would necessarily want to push that on them. So that might be a better case for, maybe starting your own CoderDojo or something like that. Like the CoderDojo folks want more of those around. So, I mean, that would be one way to say, I want to try and help out, and I want to maybe commit to doing one monthly meetup and maybe partner with a school or something like that. But I feel like, based on most of the conversations I've had, if they think that this is something that people don't want, I would just encourage them to ask. Maybe do their own focus group, and send out an email and say, hey, let's talk about this. Someone hopefully they would be open to at least talking about it to find out, are we going to have people show up with pitchforks saying we shouldn't be teaching kids to code? And I kind of doubt that would be the case, but I don't know. Maybe it's different where you're from. Yes.
Did you have any pushback from parents on the worry about screen time? Because that's the one thing that I can see in our school that, that's a big topic. And,
right.
Some parents are really comfortable with it, and, their kids are out there playing Minecraft and
right.
talking about, discussing it in school, and other parents are just like, oh, no, can't.
Right. We haven't had any kids that I know about. I mean, I don't get the complaints that maybe the administration does, but from what I've heard, the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, and that the parents don't view this as the same thing as their kids sitting on their iPad watching movies on Netflix. That they understand that this is a very different activity that requires a much more creativity. It's not a consumption activity, it's a creation activity, and that's very different. And it seems like most parents get that. So I have not seen that kind of attitude, but most of the things where I have helped out have been where parents want their kids there, they've signed them up.
Well, and two, I mean, at the K and 1 and 2 grade levels, they're just not spending that much time on a screen, really, either, right? Or, this wasn't transformative to the rest of the curriculum. They're not learning they're not 8 to 3 on the iPad. It's for that class period.
Exactly.
So, there's that too.
Yeah, I feel, in the, the kids that are doing the Finch robot classes, they're not looking at the screen the whole time. They're going back from the screen to the robot, and the robot to the paper on the ground that it's writing on, or whatever it is, or the maze. So adding that physical thing, because there's other robot type activities that the kids really seem to pick up on, because they like writing the code and then seeing it do something, seeing it blink, changing the colors, that kind of thing.
Well, and I think pulling in the fact that, hey, they're using that here, they're using reading, I think that would be a huge
Once you
element
throw
to
out the
play.
word STEM, parents, I have worked in a school and I've had those objections. Throw out the word STEM and your parents will completely drop any issue that they have. They'll be like, oh, okay, do it, go for it. It's science, tech, engineering, and math.
Okay.
It's like a big thing. It's a big thing. And
Sometimes it's STEAM too.
then they throw in the arts, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you just say the STEM word and that's it, every parent that has ever complained or been like, I don't want my kids to have so much screen time, they're only allowed a half an hour at night, and if they have it in school, then I can't have it at home. Throw out the STEAM word and it's done. That's been my experience, and again, I've worked in a school and had these complaints, and that is what has always worked.
Yes, she should come to all my talks.
Well, now you heard what I have to say about it, so you can
Yeah,
just
there we go.
have your own stuff.
Mark.
Have you seen any mention of things people, parents can do for their kids before they get to elementary school, iPad games or something to, I don't know, think about Izzy
Yep. I would say
something I can introduce to her.
Yep. I would say the code.org would be a great place to start, because it has lots of stuff for the right based on age.
Okay.
And any of those websites that I mentioned, they're each of them is slightly different and geared to what they're doing. Generally, the kids that are younger than kindergarten, it's a little bit more tricky to teach them sort of coding concepts.
Sure.
There are some people that I've talked to that they teach coding without computers. So they call it coding, but what they're doing is they're writing like mazes, or they're doing things like they're sort of working out word problems and things like that. And then they call it coding, but it's all done on paper. So that's another approach. But really, some of these games, there's an interest. I forgot the name of the game, but there's an interesting game where they have like a little character. It's kind of it's based on that. But you try and get this little turtle, or I don't know what kind of animal he is, through a maze. But and the mazes keep changing, but the mazes have patterns, and so it's like that cargo bot where kids have to find the patterns, and if they can move an arrow around on a screen and come up with a pattern and see the repetition, they can do it, and it progressively gets harder and harder. Maybe, but. I would definitely say like anything where like the kids can touch something. The B-bots are good for the young kids. I mean, that requires buying hardware, but you can touch the buttons on the top and make it do things kind of like a Finch robot would.
Well, even VTech has little like handheld tablets, or if they want like the laptop deal. With
Yeah, she's got some of those.
Yep, we've got those too.
Tells her to like look for a letter.
Yeah. When my son was 3 or 4, I cannot remember what it was called, and it was like this little fuzzy thing. It was kind of a maze, but it was like a path, and you had to put arrows on the screen, up, right, down, in order for him, and then hit go, and then the little critter would roll the way that you put the arrows, and he would either, if he fell off the path, you had to do it again.
Yep.
Kind of thing. And my 3 or 4-year-old was into that for a while. I mean, he kind of.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's exactly the thing I was thinking of.
My most recent school was an NPO, so we don't have any money. Like, NPOs are always broke. I don't know if you know that. And my kids were 2. Like, I had 2.5 to 3.5-year-olds, and we did almost every one of the coding without computer activities, and they loved them. Like, because we don't have computers, we're broke. Like, I can show you a YouTube video on my phone. That's about the level of technology we had. But they loved them, they especially the things that they could physically do. And then they would take them home, and then their parents would come back and be like, I need this information. And so, yeah, like the coding, and 2 years old. And you could hear them like talk it out, even like, well, if I do this, then this. And you're like, ha, I taught you that.
Awesome.
So,
I gotta.
yeah, you can start way younger than you think if you can find like coding without computers. So.
They start with my kids.
I know, right? Like my stepdaughter is 8, and she's just now kind of really getting into it.
Mine
And I'm
are
like,
10 and 8, and I'm just starting to look at teaching this sort of stuff.
Right.
Well, they have you scratch a bit.
Yeah. Well, Minnetonka is also also have Chinese and Spanish immersion. So both of my daughters are already fluent in Spanish, and they're learning coding at young ages. God.
that's the thing, though. It's like, the younger they are, and the earlier you can start, the better it is for their brains, because their brains are still making those pathways. If you wait to teach a foreign language or coding or any of that is like different neural pathways than traditional school subjects, the longer you wait, the harder it is for them. You teach Spanish at high school level, and they're always going to have an accent. You teach it at 3 years old, and you have a bilingual in a year. So earlier is always
I
better.
wish we had more language for elementary than where I live.
Yeah, I wish I had it when I was a kid. That's what it is, talking with adults.
This is really cool. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you. That's it. We're at time.